Hey everybody out there, welcome to Horror by the Book with Noel Wing. Today we're going to discuss some of Stephen King's most overrated and underrated novels. You might be surprised by what I selected and where I put those. So, here we go. Cue it! So, the first book I'm going to discuss is Stephen King's It. Right? This has been in the movie theaters recently. It's a story that practically everybody knows. It's one of the longer books he's written. And so it takes a long time to read it. Lots of words. And the story itself is solid. Basically, a group of kids called the Losers Club have to battle an evil entity. And the evil entity comes back 27 years later, and the kids come back as adults and battle it again. So it's a good read. It really is. So I'm criticizing a book that is worth reading. No question about that. But I have a couple issues with the book itself. The biggest issue I have is with what I call the turtle. And it's mentioned in the story, and I don't know why. I don't know why it has any real significance. You didn't need the turtle in Christine. Anyway, so the turtle is Moritan, something like that. I don't know how you pronounce it. But it's basically how the universe was created through this turtle. It's how it was done. The turtle hacked up the universe like your cat might hack up a hairball. So I don't really believe it belonged in the story. I don't believe it has any real significance in the story, other than it just takes up words and it's confusing. The spider itself in the story, of course, is it. It is really a shapeshifter. By the way, I'll try to be careful not to expose too much about the stories, but I'm assuming if you're reading or listening to this, you probably know the story anyway. But I'm still not going to give it away in case you haven't read it. But the shapeshifter itself and the battle with the kids is really, really cool. I really like it. But you just don't need the turtle in it. And the 3 points of light. You got to read the story to understand what that is. I just don't think it's that relevant. I don't think it was that interesting. The real conflict was the Losers Club and then the grown-ups with it. That's really what it was about. So all this other stuff to me was just kind of jabberwocky, if you will. I don't think it had any significance in the story. If somebody's tried to write stories themselves, I don't think it really belongs here because it doesn't add that much value to anything. So another issue I have with it is that it jumps around a lot, meaning there's a part about the group as kids, then there's the next section might be, or next chapter might be them as grown-ups, and back to kids, back to grown-ups. Not a huge fan of that. It does keep you reading. It's definitely worth the read if you haven't read it. The movies were released a few years ago where the kids was the first release and then the grown-ups were the second, which made sense. It was about the only way you could really do that story. You can't jump around in a movie like that. It'd be way confusing and kind of cumbersome to watch. But it's also a little bit cumbersome to read at times. So it made my list as a little bit overrated. But like I say, it's still not bad. My next one is my favorite horror story of all time. So I'm calling it underrated, although it's got a lot of publicity. Pet Sematary. And it's Stephen King. If you're seeing this is the first edition. Please sign it for me. I would be elated. Because this influenced me trying to write my own books. It influenced me reading one heck of a story. And basically, quick synopsis. A doctor moves his family to a more rural setting. Wants a little bit slower lifestyle. And of course, he has tragedy. And of course, the pet cemetery is close. And he ends up, out of desperation, burying certain things there, and those certain things are sort of regurgitated, right? It's a very creepy story. And what I like about the story, it has everything. It has death in it, the grief that goes with death, the desperation that can go with that grief, and of course it has some supernatural parts. And the end of that story to me is Stephen King's best ending. You talk about a chilling ending. That one should raise your hackles a little bit. It did mine when I read it. It is the perfect ending, and it is troublesome. And I put that book down, closed it up, and thought, that's how you write a scary novel. That is the benchmark of scary novels to me. It's one of the best, most entertaining books I've ever read. And say if you know if you're squeamish about horror novels, that one will make you more squeamish. It's quite a story, and but it's very impressive nonetheless. He did a great job on that story, and I was totally impressed with the characters and the way it turned out. I mean, you just can't do much better. The recent movie came out had a fair amount of plot differences that I didn't prefer. There was sort of a miniseries, Pet Sematary, that came out many years ago that was okay-ish, but that book beat both of those movies, or both of those film presentations, drastically. Once again, Pet Sematary. Stephen King, I need you to sign this. Look, I got your hat on. I want you to sign this, please. Thank you. It's the last time I'll ask. Okay, let's go to the next overrated. The Stand. This here's like a leather-bound edition that was made for a local or for a large retailer of books. So it's not the real cover. The real cover has a couple figures kind of fighting on it. It's kind of a drab, grayish-brown cover. But this one I thought was cool, so I got it. A handsome book. So anyway, The Stand is very fitting for this year because it deals with a very, very bad strain of influenza made for modern warfare that ends up killing humanity, basically, except for a few. They form factions, they fight, etc., etc. The thing is about The Stand that bothered me a little bit was I thought there were a lot of dry spots in it that really weren't that exciting. It was just cumbersome reading. Once you got through those, though, and got to the crux of the stories, it once again was good, compelling writing. Many people think that's Stephen King's work. And you know, if you're going to read it, like I have a goal, I try to read one classic every year. Well, you can make that a classic as far as I'm concerned. That's a heck of a read, and it'll take about as long as it takes to read a classic, right? But it was just a lot of characters. They were used well, so there's a lot of volume to have those characters and have you connect with them as a reader. But, oh my, that's a long book. So if you start that on January 1st, you're in Independence Day before you're finishing it. That's probably an exaggeration. But it's a heck of a story. It has a really good ending to it. You know, the protagonists are all right, kind of. And there's some real creepy, bad people in there. There's some supernatural, no doubt about that. The leader of one of the factions of bad people, if you will, has some powers. It's a very creepy book. I think very fitting for this bad year we've had in 2020. I'm not surprised that a major network has decided to stream it. That didn't surprise me in the least. That is completely makes sense to me. So, let's go on. One of my most underrated, Cujo. I loved Cujo. Couldn't get enough of it. It's not a very big novel. You can read it pretty quick. So, a while back, I was at a microbrewery with some of my friends, and outside there was a patio area, concrete patio area, I believe. And you know, there's a fire there, a fake fire. And of course, they had a large dog, a Saint Bernard, and immediately I thought, Cujo. Now that's when you know a story's affected you, or that it had an impact on you. When you see the Saint Bernard, and you say, "Oh, that's Cujo." I visited the dog. Very nice, very cool pet. Not fully grown, but plenty big. As we all know, Saint Bernards are a big, powerful breed, right? And if they really wanted to take you, in a confrontation, you'd have your hands full, no doubt about it. That's a lot of muscle and weight there. But Stephen King took this dog, nice family pet, and made it into an absolute monster. And I'm not going to go into the details of it because I want you to read it, but I'll give you the heads up that Cujo gets sick and is not very understanding of other people coming around, and a family gets trapped in their car, and Cujo is not letting them out. And at one point in the story, the sheriff shows up, and you think, there's going to be some relief. No relief. It turns out ugly, as you can probably guess. And I saw once an interview about Stephen King or something. I don't know where I got this, but he said that it would be the one novel that he might rewrite the ending of it in. But I wouldn't touch it, Mr. King. That ending was great. It was dark. It was sad. Yes, it was. But the story itself really, really, as they say, stuck to your ribs. It was a very, very cool story. There's a good documentary on the making of Cujo, by the way, the film itself, if you want to read that. And it's kind of cool how they talked about using the dogs and how many dogs they had, and the young kid that had to, have a filthy, bloody dog jump at him and stuff. Cool documentary. But anyway, Cujo always makes my list. And it was interesting. There's a character in Stephen King's life called Frank Dodd. It's in his novels. Frank Dodd's a bad guy, right? And he comes up here there in Cujo. And some people say, oh, that's Cujo's Frank Dodd reincarnated. I call baloney on that. I see no evidence of that. The aura of Frank Dodd over the town, his evil, is what, to me, Stephen King's referring to. I don't see anything that says, oh yeah, Cujo is Frank Dodd. So you can correct me if I'm wrong, comment if you think I'm wrong, but it's kind of silly. By the way, item number 2 about Cujo is, if you get a chance, go online and look at the current paperback out by Cujo. It has a dog like snarling or biting through a fence, so you don't see its snout. That is not the snout of a Saint Bernard. I'm sorry, it's just not. That's a German Shepherd or a Doberman, probably a German Shepherd. I know what a Saint Bernard snout looks like. That's not one. So come on, people, you can do better than that. Let's move on to a book that's way, way overrated. Was The Girl That Loved Tom Gordon. It's a story about a young girl that gets lost on a family hiking trip, lost for days, and it's kind of a story that takes place in her head. And I just thought the story was kind of boring, actually. I felt like it was a good story to read before you went to bed because you could fall asleep quick. That was just my opinion from being an avid Stephen King fan. He can do better. And I think he wrote this during a time where he had an accident where he was struck by a vehicle and he had some recovery time mixed in there. And I don't know that for sure, but that's what I'm thinking in my head. But it was just tough reading as far as excitement for me. And I did enjoy parts of it. And I guess they're making a movie out of it now. That's going to be interesting to see how you make a movie in the head of a 9-year-old girl that's lost in the woods. But if anybody can do it, a modern, good horror director probably can. It just wasn't a favorite read. But the next book is one that should be a movie. And everybody forgets about this novel. It's terrific. Duma Key. Yes, quick, Duma Key. See that pretty paradise picture? So Duma Key, I think, is the first story of Stephen King's that happened outside of Maine, as I recall. But I could be wrong. Anyway, so guy gets hurt in an industrial accident, loses his arm, has a brain injury. Psychological doctor, psychiatrist, psychologist, whatever, therapist, suggests he moves away, he ends up in divorce. Right, so he moves to Duma Key, Florida, where he encounters some interesting folks. There's some evil there. Guy starts painting. His paintings are more than just a picture on a canvas. There's an evil force down there that's coming to a head. It's got action. Duma Key is one of the best novels I've ever read. I enjoyed Duma Key from the time I opened. And here's why. When I talk to fellow writer friends of mine, I have told them I thought the king of dialogue is Stephen King. Nobody does dialogue like Stephen. He is the best, and his subject matter is weird, and you still believe the conversation's happening. I felt during Duma Key, I was sitting, watching from the corner of the room all this stuff happen. That dialogue in that book was solid. I remember the characters, I remember some of the events, but what I remember most is descriptions of the characters and discussions they were having, the types of discussions they were having as the story evolved. Duma Key should be a movie. I thought it was terrific. And if you haven't read Duma Key, put that on your list. You walk down the street and ask people to name 5 or 10 Stephen King novels, I'll bet you Duma Key doesn't come up. It should. That's a good story and very well written and very believable. It was brilliant, I thought. One book I'll talk about I didn't like very much was Sleeping Beauties. I don't even have it because I gave it away. Because I thought that was strange. It was like The Stand to me as far as a number of characters that was jammed into a smaller, simpler story. It's like they were trying to be Clive Barker in the fantasy world. And they couldn't. When I say they, I mean Stephen King wrote that with his son, Owen King. And I had a hard time reading it. I felt like a character would show up 2/3 of the way through the novel. And who are they again and what's their importance? Sleeping Beauties, you can read it if you want. I don't think it was a great work. I really don't. But I will say, here, I'm going to give one more shout out to one I thought was really cool. This is 4 Past Midnight. It's a collection of novellas, or shorter stories, right, by Mr. King. There's one there called The Sundog. I think the Langoliers in there too. Some of you may know the Langoliers. Secret Garden, Secret Window was in there, I think. Anyway, The Sundog is so cool. Kid gets a camera for his birthday. Polaroid son, takes pictures. The pictures are all not what he's intending to shoot when they finally come out. And the pictures are changing a little bit with each one. I'm not going to tell you much about the story. I want you to read it. It's short. You can read it in 1 or 2 sittings. And it is a really cool story. It was bothersome. It was creative. As somebody that's wrote 14 short stories like I have, I totally think that was awesome and creative, and the way you do a short story. Stephen King, by the way, is an awesome short story person. He's Skeleton Crew. He's got other collections, everything eventual. And I know I'm leaving out another one. The guy has written some great, great short stories. You got to read some of those. The Shawshank Redemption, you all know that movie? Oh, guess who did that? That's a Stephen King short, okay? The guy is an amazing writer of short stories, and they're fun to write, too. And it's really fun to read a good short story. I love reading them. So, other books didn't make this commentary for whatever reason, because there's 82 things I think Stephen King has published. Misery is one of my favorites. I like Needful Things. There's just so many. Gerald's Game, now that's a psychological one inside a woman's head that, should have, the girl loved Tom Gordon. Would have been nice if it got closer to Gerald's Game, because Gerald's Game was a really super interesting read and very creepy, but it took place in a woman's head, a bunch of it, and it's very disturbing story and the things that you read about in there. But there's so many. Stephen King has had an incredible body of work. Once again, this is all my opinion. I could be completely wrong. But I am very, very impressed with his body of work, and so anybody who's been involved in the genre is going to be pretty impressed with Stephen King. He's defined his own genre. Not many writers do that. So stay tuned. Coming up, I think we're going to have a movie episode coming up, where we're going to talk about books that became movies. One I'm going to talk about is called The Turn of the Screw, that became The Turning, that came out in a movie a couple years ago. That novel is short. You can read it before then. So when I talk about The Turn of the Screw, written I think in the 1890s, a long, long time ago, like way long time ago, you know what I'm talking about. And there's several other huge movies that were books first. Jaws. You got The Exorcist, written by Blatty. Good read. Good read. Read The Exorcist. You'd be surprised. Guy wrote a really, really good story. So that's coming up soon, along with some other episodes I'm going to work through and some material. So, once again, this is Horror by the Book. Oh my goodness, I'm out.